Okay, so good morning once again, everyone. Happy New Year to all of you. So, basically, start of a new year. So, we would also like to start with we would like to start this new year with a new discussion topic, no? Para tuloy-tuloy yung learnings natin in this new year, di ba? So, for today, continue pa rin tayo sa intermediate accounting series natin. So, nangangalahati na tayo, no? We are now in the middle of the chapters for, basically, this is intermediate accounting 2. So, our topic for today will be all about lease accounting. Okay? This is lease accounting. So, let's begin. Okay? So, lease accounting. So, to start a discussion for lease accounting, let us first define. Okay? Let us define what is a lease transaction. Okay? Now, ito tinatawag natin na lease. Okay? Kumbaga, ito yun siya to what is we already know or yung kumbaga common to all of us. This is basically in its simplest form rent transaction. Okay? Renta. Okay? So, in a lease transaction, basically, at its minimum, there are always two parties, no? So, let us assume na we have party A and party B. Okay? One party acts, acts as the owner of the subject of the lease or yung subject of the rent. Which is, pag sinabi po natin na subject of the lease, okay, ito yung pinaparentahan natin. It may be property, land, building, or it can be equipment, yung mga machinery, okay, regardless of the value. Okay? The party who owns the subject of the lease, okay, in a typical lease transaction or in a lease transaction, siya yung tinatawag natin na lessor. Let us represent that as A. Okay? As A. The party who engages to the lessor na sinabi niya, sige lessor, let me rent your, let's say, land. Okay? Yung nagre-renta. Okay? Siya yung tinatawag natin na lessee. Okay? Si lessee ngayon, okay, in exchange for using the subject of the lease, yung pinaparenta, will give, okay, certain consideration sa lessor. Yung consideration na sinasabi natin dyan, typically, that is yung tinatawag natin na rental payment. Okay? Si lessor ngayon, in exchange for that consideration which will regularly receive, will allow B to use the subject of the lease. So, that is a lease transaction. Okay? In its simplest form. Okay? Now, in accounting, pag sinabi po natin na lease or accounting for lease transactions, magkaiba ang treatment natin sa accounting pagdating sa lessor at pagdating sa lessee. Kumbaga, We have a different accounting treatment when it comes to lease on the part of the lessee. We also have a different accounting treatment when it comes to lease on the part of the lessor. Okay, you have to remember that, no? That is why it is very important for us na if we analyze a transaction, okay, if we analyze a transaction, the first thing that we need to know is that for us to determine who is the lessor and who is the lessee. Or if we are answering um, problems, exams, especially in the board exam, um, we should know, okay, we should know if sino ba tong tinutukoy sa problem na sinasagutan natin. Or kung sino ba tayo. Lessee ba tayo or tayo ang lessor? Kasi nga, magkaiba yung treatment nilang dalawa pagdating sa accounting. Okay? So, to continue, okay? But before that, remember that, ha? Because that is a very important concept, no? The distinction between a lessor and a lessee. Okay? So, when it comes to the lessee, or by the way, no? Lease accounting ngayon, okay? Bagong-bago lang talaga to, okay? Is now covered by IFRS 16. Okay? This new standard, or kumbaga may specific na tayo talaga na, or may standard talaga tayo specifically tackling all lease transaction, which took effect just in 2019. Okay? In 2019 lang, so fresh pa talaga. Kaya nga, ang concept na to ngayon ng list is, kumbaga, iba yung list na natutunan, especially namin, no, nung kapanahunan namin, kaysa ngayon. Kasi nga, may bagong standard tayo dito, itong IFRS 16, which took effect on January 2019. Ha? So, to start our discussion, no, let us first consider lease accounting for the lessee. Okay? For the lessee. Okay? Before, yung lease talaga in general, okay, we have two types of lease. Okay? Two types of lease. The first type, yung tinatawag natin na operating lease, and the second type, yung finance lease. Although ngayon, ito pa rin naman, meron pa rin talaga, under IFRS 16, ito pa rin siya, meron pa rin tayong dalawang klase ng lease, which is itong operating lease at finance lease. However, okay, yung nagbago is that when it comes to lessee, okay, lessee accounting, all types of lease, okay, pag ikaw daw yung nagre-renta, all types of lease should be accounted as a finance lease, which we will go later on. How do we account for that, no? But first, we have to know this, no? This is very important. In general, if we are the lessee, okay? If we are the lessee, tayo na nagre-renta, lahat ng klase ng lease, okay, that we are to engage in general should be accounted for as a finance lease. Okay? So, ang pagkakaintindi natin dyan is that pag may lease transaction talaga, tapos tayo ang lessee, always account it as a finance lease. Okay? Except, okay, may exception. Which is, itong exception na to, this is the only times, okay, that we are allowed to account for a lease transaction if we are the lessee under the operating lease accounting. Ano yung mga exception na yon? If, number one, the subject of the lease is low value. Yung mga mumurahin lang, no? Yung mga mumurahin lang. Low amount. Okay? Now, the second instance where we are allowed, okay, we are allowed to account for a lease transaction as an operating lease is that pag short term. Okay? Short term lang yung lease. 12 months and below. Okay? 12 months and below. So, we have to remember this, no? We have to remember this. Under the standard, okay? Under the standard, the statement is, under the lessee, okay, if we are the lessee, all lease transactions is a finance lease. However, okay, we are given the option, okay, option lang, okay, option lang. We are allowed to report it as an operating lease if the subject of the lease is a low value item or the term of the lease is short term, 12 months and below. Okay, 12 months and below. So, we have to know that, internalize that, because sometimes, no, pagdating sa mga questions, baka ititrick na naman tayo, okay? Baka sabihin na under the lessee, lease transactions are to be recognized either as, okay? So the point is, what is required is that it is a finance lease. However, we are allowed to present it as an operating lease if it is low value or short term. No, remember that. That is on the part of the lessee. Now, when it comes to the lessor, yung nagpaparenta, we account lease transactions na normal. Kumbaga, parang hindi siya affected nung IFRS 16 natin. Parang kinary over lang yung previous standards na nagko-cover sa lease transaction. So, in its absolute form, pwede pa rin tayong operating lease or finance lease if, okay, ano yung applicable na situation sa kanya. Kumbaga, pag sinabi po natin na applicable na situation is kung makukuha ba niya yung mga guidelines on what should be reported as a finance lease or what should be reported as a operating lease. Okay? So that is one of the major difference, no? Pag sinabi po natin na lease accounting. Magkaiba talaga ang treatment sa accounting ng lessor at lessee, no? So talking about operating lease and finance lease, okay? Ano ba tong tinatawag natin na operating and finance lease? Okay? Pag sinabi natin na operating lease, okay, ito yung typical na kumbaga common na nalalaman natin pagdating sa renta na kung ikaw yung nagre-rent, yung annual rental or yung regular rental payment mo is just to be recorded as a rent expense. Okay? regular transaction. Kung binayaran mo siya in advance, okay, kung binayaran mo siya in advance, then record it as a prepaid rent. Okay? Yung normal. Pag sa lessee. Now, on the part of the lessor naman, yung normal rin na recognition of rental income. No? So, kumbaga, pag naka-receive ka ng cash, debit cash, credit rental income. Or kung you receive cash in advance for a future rent, debit cash, credit, prepaid rent. Okay? So, yun yung common, no? Medyo madali lang talaga pag sinabi natin na operating lease. Yung finance lease naman, okay? Yung finance lease naman, ito yung klase ng lease or ito yung recognition of lease wherein inform rent siya, but in substance, there is really a transfer of ownership of the subject of the lease. Okay? Sa operating lease, normal rent. Pagdating sa finance lease, kumbaga, kung titingnan natin, renta lang siya talaga. However, in substance, parang binigay na ni lessor yung subject of the lease kay lessee. Kaya tinatawag siya finance lease. Okay? So, in general, ang criteria lang talaga, no? This is on the part of the lessor, ha? This is on the part of the lessor kasi nga, sabi nga ng standard, pagdating sa lessee, always finance lease na siya. So, wala na tayong problema dito kung ano yung treatment natin pagdating sa lessee. Kasi nga, always a finance lease. But, we are allowed for operating lease if low value and short term yung rent. Pagdating sa lessor, dito tayo medyo magkakaproblema because this is in the lessor's accounting treatment, okay? Kumbaga, we need to identify first the transaction kung ano ba talaga, operating lease ba to or finance lease. Okay? So we will consider it as a finance lease in general if, kumbaga, ito lang yung intindihin natin, there is substantial, okay, transfer of ownership. Kung ang transaction ba makaka-create ng substantial transfer of ownership. Now, ano ba yung titingnan natin para makasabi tayo na there is substantial transfer of ownership? Number 1, pwede na yung lease term, okay? Yung lease term is close, okay? Or it will cover all, okay? It will cover all the life of the subject of the lease. Kumbaga, in essence, for example, yung subject of the lease natin, let's say building, yung based on our reliable estimate, the life of the building, let's say 50 years. Then, nirenta sa atin. Yung lease term is also 50 years. Okay? So, basically, the lease term will cover the life of the asset. No? In form, rent siya, but in substance, there is a substantial transfer of ownership. Bakit? Kasi nga, yung life ng building, 50 years lang, pagkatapos ng lease term, wala na rin yung building. Fully depreciated. In substance, hindi na natin magagamit. Si lessee lang yung gumamit. Okay? Now, the gauge for this transaction, okay, although, yun nga, pag sinabi natin yung lease term substantially covers the life of the asset, the standard, sadly, is not or does not tells us or does not tell us kung ano ba yung tinatawag natin na substantial. Di ba? So, we will follow the kumbaga, professional judgment lang to, no? Professional judgment yung ipa-follow talaga natin dito. So, the point is, usually, pag at least 75%, no? At least 75% yung mako-cover ng lease term sa life of the asset, finance lease na yan siya. Okay? Finance lease. Next, criteria on the part of the lessor. There is an option to purchase, which this option to purchase, this option to purchase is, kumbaga, there is a reasonable, certainty, there is a reasonable certainty na itong option to purchase is talagang i-exercise. Okay? Option to purchase at the end of the lease term. Okay? At the end of the lease term. Finance lease na yan siya. There is a substantial transfer of ownership. Remember, no? Reasonable certainty. Okay? Reasonable certainty. Next. The present value of all payments received. Okay? Okay? The present value of all payment received by the lessor, okay, substantially covers the fair market value of the asset or of the subject of the lease. Kumbaga, pag i-discount natin yung lahat ng payments coming from the lessee, tapos yung total amount nun substantially covers the fair market value of the asset, then it is a finance lease. Again, the problem natin dito is ano ba tong substantial? No? Kasi nga, hindi rin ito dinefine ng standard. However, per industry practice natin, yung gauge dyan is 90%. So, if the present value of all payments received by the lessor is 90% of the fair market value, then it is substantial. So, finance lease na yan siya. Okay? Finance lease na yan siya. Next, obviously, if under the agreement, the lease agreement nila, agreement ng lessor and the lessee is that there is a transfer of ownership at the end, okay, at the end of the lease term, then it is a finance lease. Okay? So, kumbaga, para mas madali para sa atin, ito yung mga titingnan natin na mga criteria. Okay? In general, ang ibig sabihin lang nito ng mga criteria is that if there is a substantial transfer of ownership, okay, in maybe not in form but in substance, then that is a finance lease. Yan lang yung kumbaga keyword natin dyan. Substantial transfer of ownership in substance rather than in form. But of course, kung in form, meron talaga sa agreement na there is a transfer of ownership, then that is obviously a finance lease. Pag ang lease transaction, hindi natin makikitaan ng mga kriteriya na yon, o mga kriteriya na ito, that is an operating lease. Okay? That is an operating lease. Yung normal na rent transaction. So that is on the part of the lessor. On the lessee, automatic finance lease na siya. Wala nang kriteriya na titingnan natin. Finance lease na siya. However, again, as stated earlier, we are allowed to report it as operating lease, okay, as operating lease, provided na low value yung subject of the lease and the lease term is, kumbaga, short period. 12 months or lease. 12 months or less. Okay. So, let us continue. Now, so much for operating and finance lease, no? Now, lease accounting. Pagdating sa lessee, no? Let us start with the lessee, no? Yung nagre-renta. Okay? When it comes to the lessee, okay? On initial recognition, okay? Initial recognition, we need to recognize, kasi nga finance lease siya, okay? Finance lease siya. We need to recognize, number one, the asset na in substance marireceive natin. Kasi nga, let's say, finance lease. Meron tayong marireceive na asset. Okay? Meron tayong marireceive na asset. However, okay, the account that we will use is not the asset per se. But we will term it, or yung i-recognize lang muna natin is yung right of use. Okay? So, in accounting, yung account na gagamitin natin na first pagdating sa lessee is yung tinatawag natin na right of use asset. Okay? Right of use asset. So, we need to recognize it on initial recognition. Okay? The second account that we need to recognize pagdating or i-recognize ni lessee on initial recognition is yung tinatawag natin na lease liability. Okay? Lease liability. So, actually, yung problem lang naman talaga dito on initial recognition is that we should know what is the component yung what is the component of the right of use asset and what is the component of the lease liability. Okay? Pag makuha natin yan, if we know the concept on what are those right of use asset or what are those components of the right of use asset and what are the components of those considered as lease liability, then medyo okay na tayo. Okay? Dito lang talaga tayo medyo magiging komplikado because we really need to understand and internalize these components. Okay? So first, okay, pag sinabihin po natin na right of use asset, okay, ang components niyan, okay, number one is that present value of rental payment. Okay? Present value of the regular rental payment. Right of use asset yan siya. Okay. Pag si lessee ngayon, okay, is required, okay, is required by the agreement to pay yung tinatawag natin na mga initial direct costs or yung cost, okay, yung mga direct costs na kailangan for the transaction to be perfected. Otherwise, kung walang lease transaction, wala ito na mga costs. Okay? Yan yung tinatawag natin na mga initial direct costs. So, kumbaga, ang concept lang yan, initial direct cost siya if that particular expense is nagkaroon lang tayo niyan because merong lease transaction. Kung walang lease transaction, walang cost sana. Okay? That is initial direct cost. Okay? If that is paid by the lessee, okay? If that is paid by the lessee, that is part of your right of use asset. Okay? That is part of your right of use asset. Okay? Now, there are also these instances. Okay? There are also these instances na, kumbaga, as a congratulatory gesture coming from the, okay? As a congratulatory gesture coming from the lessor, yung bagang tuwang-tuwa siya kasi nga nag-rent ka sa kanya, makaka-income siya. That particular lessor will give you incentives. Okay? Will give you incentives. And that particular incentives is that although, okay, ikaw yung magbabayad ng initial direct cost, this is not asset, no? Ikaw yung magbabayad ng initial direct cost, pero you will be reimbursed by the lessor. Okay? You will be reimbursed by the lessor. Yan yung tinatawag natin na mga lease incentive. Okay? Lease incentive. So, itong lease incentive, dapat ibabawas natin yan siya. Okay? Ibabawas yan siya para makuha yung right of use asset. Okay? Lease incentive. Ibabawas yun siya. Okay? Ano pa ba yung component ng right of use asset? Yung mga tinatawag natin na future, okay? future restoration obligation. Okay? Kung baga, itong future restoration obligation is that if, let's say for example, sa agreement ninyo or sa term, or maybe required by law, okay, there is a contractual obligation on your part na kung ano yung pinut up mo, let's say, na mga leasehold improvements sa subject of the lease or anything sa subject of the lease, and you need to dismantle that, okay? You need to dismantle that and restore the subject to its original form, and then ikaw as lessee, ikaw yung magbabayad, okay? Ikaw yung magbabayad, that will form part to your right of use asset. Okay? That will form part to your right of use asset at present value. Okay? At present value. Plus, okay? That will form part to your right of use asset. Okay? Plus any other cost, no? Directly related sa lease transaction. Na kumbaga, yun nga, hindi, ang mga cost na ito is that kung wala sanang lease transaction, walang cost. Okay? So those type of costs, right of use asset. Okay? Right of use asset. Now, sometimes, in a lease agreement, kumbaga, we are required, in a lease agreement, we are required to pay taxes, yung mga real property taxes and other licenses in regard to the subject of the lease, no? Those type of expenses, yan yung tinatawag natin na mga executory costs, no? Kumbaga, pag kung iintindihin lang natin or para mas madali natin itong intindihin kung ano tong executory cost. Kumbaga, ito yung tinatawag natin na cost of maintaining. Okay? Cost of maintaining the subject of the lease. And we are required by the agreement na tayo, lessee, ang magbabayad. This is executory cost. Example yan nga, yung mga real property taxes, mga licenses, repairs and maintenance. Okay? So, itong executory cost, this is not, okay, remember this ha? This is not part of your right of use asset. Hindi siya kasali. Because this executory cost, under the guidance of IFRS 16, this is outright, okay? This is outright expense. Okay? So, kumbaga, if we are to spend for repairs and maintenance of the subject of the lease, si lessee yung nagbayad, expense yun siya diretso. Hindi siya right of use asset. In essence, hindi siya i-capitalize as right of use asset. If we are to pay for real property tax, expense din yan siya diretso. Okay? So, remember that, executory cost. Okay, now, when it comes to lease liability naman, okay, lease liability, the component of a lease liability, number one, present value of rental payment pa rin. Okay? That is the first component. Lease liability nga siya, utang natin na dapat bayaran in the future. Pero, at present value. Okay? At present value. Sa lease liability, walang initial direct cost. Remember that. Okay? Now, lease incentive dapat i-deduct. Pero, we need to be careful with this. Why? Okay? Because ito yung guidance natin dyan. If the lease incentive, okay, if the lease incentive is to be paid outright by the lessor, meaning on initial or at the start of the lease, binigyan ka na agad ng pera, na-receive mo na as lease incentive, as reimbursement, kumbaga, then that is only part or that is only to be deducted sa right of use asset mo. Hindi sa lease liability. Kuha? However, if the lease incentive is, kumbaga, yung agreement ng lease incentive is that instead of reimbursement, in the future mo pa siya marireceive in the form of as a deduction to your rental payment. Obviously, part of your lease liability as a deduction. Kasi nga, bawas siya sa rental payment mo. Diba? So, ito medyo tricky to kasi nga, minsan yung pagkakaalam natin dito is that the lease incentive, i-consider lang siya pagdating sa right of use asset. Hindi. In fact, yung pagka-state nito sa standard is that yung lease incentive is that included siya or kumbaga considered as a deduction sa right of use asset and sa lease liability. However, commonly practice kasi na yung lease incentive is given at the start of the lease pa nga, hindi in the future as a deduction to your initial direct cost. Kaya most of the time, deducted lang siya sa right of use asset. Okay? But what is correct is that it is to be considered sa right of use asset and sa lease liability. Okay? Klaro yun siya. Okay? Next is that itong future restoration obligation, that will be part of your lease liability also. Kasi nga, in the future mo pa siya babayaran. So basically, obviously, part of your lease liability. Okay? In addition pala, okay, meron tayong nakalimutan. If part of the agreement, okay, part of the agreement is that there is a guaranteed residual value. Okay? Ano ba itong guaranteed residual value? Alam naman natin yung concept ng residual value, di ba? Yung value of the asset at the end of its life. Di ba? Yan yung residual value. Pag sinabi sa lease agreement natin na, sige, para iparenta mo talaga sa akin yung subject of the lease is that I will guarantee you na at the end of the lease term, I will pay you the residual value of the asset. Yan yung tinatawag natin na guaranteed residual value. Which is, ang magbabayad is si lessee. Okay? Is si lessee. That will form part of your right of use asset. Okay? Again, katulad nga ng concept ng future restoration obligation, this should be at present value. As part of your, or kumbaga, kasi nga in the future pa yan siya babayaran, that will also be added to your lease liability. Okay? Guaranteed residual value. Okay? So next, ano pa ba? So, yung purchase option, that is part of your right of use asset. Pero, again, as noted nga kanina, dapat itong purchase option is that reasonably certain na i-exercise talaga para magiging part siya sa right of use asset mo, and at the same time magiging part din yan siya sa lease liability mo. Okay? Otherwise, pag hindi reasonably certain, do not include. Okay? Do not include. The same with residual value. If hindi siya guaranteed, meaning you as the lessee is not obligated to pay the residual value at the end of the lease term, then do not include to your right of use asset and to your to your lease liability. Okay? To your guaranteed, to your right of use asset and to your lease liability. Okay? So, yun. Yung mga consideration. No? So, that is for the lessee on initial recognition. Okay? Now, on the part of the lessor, okay? Finance lease tayo ha. Remember, finance lease tayo. On the part of the lessor naman, so, change perspective tayo. What if tayo yung lessor? Okay? Now, pag, let's say, operating lease siya. Okay? If operating lease, no complex accounting problem tayo on initial recognition. Why? Because we only recognize, okay, per accounting sa operating lease if makaka-receive na tayo ng rental payments. Or if we give lease incentives, then only recognize the incentive as an expense, credit cash. Pag makareceive tayo ng rental payment, debit cash, credit, rent income. Okay? Yung medyo komplikado is that what if finance lease pasok sa mga criteria? There is a substantial transfer of ownership. Okay? Sa lessor. Now, sa finance lease naman, on the side of the lessor ngayon, there are two types of finance lease. Okay, sa lessor ha, there are two types of finance lease. Yung regular, okay, finance lease and yung sales type list. Okay? Regular finance list and yung sales type list. So, ano yung kaibahan? Okay? Now, you have to remember this because ito yung dapat makita natin sa problem, no? Kasi nga, iba din yung treatment pag regular and sales type list pagdating sa lessor. Okay? So, regular finance list is that yung katandaan lang talaga natin dito is that yung lessor, okay, is not or basically is only in the business of leasing. Kumbaga, yung ginagawa lang talaga niya is that nagpaparenta. Okay? That is regular finance lease. Nagpaparenta. Or part of the nature of its business is that nagpaparenta talaga siya. No? Sa sales type lease naman is that yung lessor dito is a dealer. And then, as part of his or as part of its sales process, kumbaga, para mas mapadali yung benta niya, ang ginagawa niya is that inform para siyang renta but in the end, binebenta talaga niya in installment. Okay? Dealer. Kaya tinatawag siya na sales type lease. So, the point is, pag regular finance list lang, okay, pag regular finance list lang, is that, yung recognition natin dito is that for the lessor, okay, just remember this because later on we will go further with this, ha. In a regular finance list, yung i-recognize lang talaga ni lessor is purely rent income, okay, is purely rent income and interest income. Or kumbaga, you will only earn interest. Okay? You will only earn interest. However, pag sales type list ka, sorry, let me go back. Walang rent income, but rather earned interest. Okay? From the transaction. Okay? Walang rent income, but rather interest. Now, in a sales type list, okay, in a sales type list, because you are a dealer, okay, because you are a dealer, you will, okay, you will recognize, okay, you will recognize, number one, a gross profit from the sale and interest income. Okay? So later on, we will have examples now showing how these transactions or how will we do accounting with these transactions, no? Okay. Now, the main problem natin dito pagdating sa lesson, okay, is that number one, how do we compute for interest income? And how do we compute for gross profit and also interest income pag sales type list? Okay? So, remember this. Okay? Interest income, okay? Interest income muna tayo, is computed as gross investment, okay, in the lease minus net investment. Okay? Net investment. That will be your interest income. Your gross profit, if it is a sales type lease, that is computed as net investment in the lease, okay, less the cost, okay, cost or not cost, to be specific, carrying amount of the asset or yung subject of the lease. So that will be your gross profit, okay, from the sales type lease. Okay? So again, pag finance lease, ito lang yung i-consider natin. Gross investment less net investment. Pag sales type lease, we will recognize this and also we will have to recognize the gross profit. Pag sales type lease. Okay? That is the first distinction. Okay? That is the first distinction. Number 2, okay? Pag finance lease siya, okay? Later on, we will define what is a gross and net investment, ha? So, let us just continue this, no? Para hindi tayo malito. Okay. Number 2, distinction is that, pag finance lease siya, okay? Purely recognize the receivable. Okay? Recognize receivable lang talaga. Receivable of the receivable from the lease. However, okay? However, pag sales type lease siya, we need to record sales. Kasi nga, in substance, there is sale. Okay? There is sale of an asset. Okay? There is sale of asset. Okay. So, okay. I will cut this video muna kasi medyo mahaba na. Okay? So, we will continue with part 2 of this discussion, okay? See you in the next video.